Շնորհակալություն։ Մեր այսօրվա երկրորդ զեկուցողը պիտի ըլլա Պրոֆեսոր Թաներ Ակչամը, որում պիտի ներկայացնե Մանուկ Ավետիքյանը։ Մանուկ Ավետիքյան զավակն է Բոլսահայ միության հոգապարծու եւ մշակութային հանձնախումբի ադենաբեդ դոկտոր Հովաննես եւ Սետա Քուլակ Ավետիքյանի։ Շրջանավարտ է Մանուկյան Դեմիրջյան վարժարանեն, ան Հայաստանի ամերիկյան համալսարանեն ստացած է մագիստրոսի գոչում եւ աշխատած է Երևանի հայոց ցեղասպանության թանգարանի հիմնարկին մեջ եւ հայկական թերթերուն մեջ։ Ներկայիս կաշխատի շոուա հիմնադրամի հավաքածոներու բաժնի մեջ, որպես ցեղասպանության վերաբրածներու վկայություններու հավաքածոյի ցանկակրող։ Գհրավիրեմ Մանուկը։
Բարի եկաք, պիտի փորձեմ հագիրճ եւ ավելի ամփոփ կերպով խոսել եւ այդ պատճառով անգլերենով պիտի ներկայացնեմ այս բան Թաներ Ակշամին, Prof. Թաներ Ակշամին, հետո Professor Richard Hovannesyanին։ Հիմա անգլերենով։ Everyone hears me fine? Basis. For a brief bio of two very great men who have generally very long bios, but Dr. Taner Akcam was born in the village of Ölçek in Ardahan, Turkey, and he became interested in and active in Turkish politics at a very early age. Soon after graduating from Middle Eastern Technical University in Ankara, he entered graduate school in the same university in 1975. In parallel, he took up the editorship of a leftist journal called Devrimci Yol, and unfortunately, soon after, was arrested with a 9-year verdict in prison for his political involvement. After a year in prison, he was able to escape to Germany, where he received political asylum. In due time, in his time as a new immigrant in Germany, he eventually began working as a research scientist in sociology at the Hamburg Institute for Social Research. His first research topic was the history of political violence in the late Ottoman Empire and early Republic of Turkey. Historian and sociologist Taner Akcam received his doctorate in 1995 from the Leibniz University of Hanover with a dissertation on the Turkish national movement and the Armenian genocide against the background of military tribunals in Istanbul between 1919 and 1922. Between 2000 and 2002, Dr. Akcam was a visiting professor at the history at the University of Michigan. He worked also as a visiting associate professor at the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Minnesota. He has been a member of the history department at Clark University since 2008 until very recently, and has helped widen the scope of Armenian genocide studies with a new generation of graduate students. And as of very recently, a few years ago, he also made Dr. Gergerian's archive publicly available in an open access way, which was a very large feat. For the past 30 years, until very recently, he has published much over a dozen works, both in English and Turkish, and translated works into many other languages. Some notable works are A Shameful Act, the Armenian Genocide and the Question of Turkish Responsibility, and his most recent, The Killing Orders, Talat Pasha's Telegrams, and the Armenian Genocide, and also Ermeni Soy, the Kırım'ın kısa bir tarihi, a brief history of the Armenian Genocide in Turkish. For those who may or may not have been here at the Bolsai Mutyun about 3 years ago, pre-COVID and during the award ceremony for Vakın Dadıryan's award, Dr. Akcam advocated for a research center for Armenian genocide studies as one way to honor Dr. Dadıryan's legacy by institutionalizing Armenian genocide scholarship. Just a few months ago, his message was heard, and he was appointed as the inaugural director of the Armenian Genocide Research Program, housed within the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA, where he plans to widen the scope and multiply the avenues of Armenian genocide research to totally different levels. Myself, working at the USC Shoah Foundation on Armenian genocide oral histories, most notably Dr. Hovannesyan's archive, I'm very excited for his new program's initiative and hope to cooperate to further Armenian genocide studies and much more. it's also very important to note, as we honor the life and work of Akcam Dadrian, as Lucine Sakian did earlier, that Dr. Akcam's relationship with Dr. Dadrian was a very crucial one, as Dr. Dadrian was his early research advisor and among his staunchest supporters to continue in this relatively fresh field of Armenian genocide studies. I'd like to invite Dr. Taner Akcam to speak and to come to the podium, and I really appreciate your work. Look forward to your plans with the Promise Institute.
Thank you, Manu. Thank you so much, Manu, for this nice introduction. Thank you for inviting me for this meaningful evening. Professor Richard Hovhannisyan is the person most deserving of the Akcam Dadrian Scholarship Award. It is an honor for me to be asked on this auspicious evening to share some remarks about the person for whom the award is named, my late Professor Akcam Dadrian. But first, allow me to make some basic observation on the current state of Armenian genocide research. When in 1975, Michael Hagopyan made his first Emmy-nominated documentary on the Armenian genocide, he aptly titled it The Forgotten Genocide. In the nearly 5 decades that have passed since then, there have been hundreds of publications on the genocide in a variety of languages, and the Armenian genocide has since taken its rightful place within the field of genocide studies. It is a forgotten genocide no longer. Nevertheless, the road here has not been an easy one, and it has been paved by the efforts and sacrifice of a great many people. Armenian genocide research has passed through the same stages as other such fields. The first experts on the Armenian genocide were, of course, the survivors themselves. Aram Andonian and Father Kirikor Gergerian were survivors who attempted the systematic collection of valuable Ottoman documentation, survivor memoirs, and other archival materials. To these two individuals who deserve memorials in their own rights, I would also add the name of Haygazan Kazaryan. But the works of Akcam Dadrian represent the true foundation of the field of Armenian genocide research and a bridge between the old world and the new. I would also place the multi-volume work of Richard Hovhannisyan in this category. If we can speak of a fledgling stage of Armenian genocide research, then Akcam Dadrian and Richard Hovhannisyan serve as its icebreakers, forging a path through a frozen sea of ignorance, indifference, and denial. But unlike sea ice, the hindrances against which they struggled were not static. They were also struggling against the Turkish state's long-standing and well-funded campaign of denial. Their work also initially met with silence and indifference within the academic world. Even in the United States, most historians of the late Ottoman period tended not to focus on or even completely ignore the series of massacres and genocides during this era. The excessive focus on such subjects was just as often dismissed as an expression of narrow-minded ethnocentrism by members of the targeted ethnic groups. Ignoring such uncomfortable truth were often seen as a noble act of academic impartiality. In recent decades, however, the study of the Armenian genocide has so significantly advanced that no trace remains of these earlier obstacles. Indeed, the tables have so turned that if there is anyone facing obstacle in American academia today, it is those advocates of denial. The copious scholarly research of the past 2 decades has transformed academia into a hostile territory for them. calls to hear both sides of this story are regularly dismissed out of hand as so much nonsense in these days. The study of the Armenian genocide has largely progressed this far due to tireless, decades-long efforts of its early pioneers, Vahakn Dadrian and Richard Hovhannisyan. For this, Richard, we owe you an immense debt of gratitude. And now, a few words on Professor Dadrian. It would be impossible for me to summarize his accomplishment in laying the foundation for scholarly Armenian genocide research. What I will do instead, to make some personal remarks about Vahakn and my relationship with him. Dadrian was my master, my teacher, my hocam, as we used to say in Turkish. And above all, he was my guardian angel. The way in which I'm in his debt are too many to count. He had prominent role in my decision to begin researching the Armenian genocide. Had it not been for his assistance, I'm not certain that I would have been able to embark on what has been my life's work. It was the year 1990-1991. I had decided to work on the Armenian genocide. I broached the idea at the institute at which I was then working in Hamburg. They were hesitant and asked me to put together a workshop and invite some experts on the subject. They would then better be able to reach a decision on the basis of the debates and discussions that transpired there. But where could I find experts on this subject? I had found 2 articles written by Dadrian, but they were in English language, a language I couldn't then speak. But I noticed that Dadrian cites many Turkish language sources. This guy has to know Turkish, I thought. And so I decided to write a letter in Turkish to him. I found Dadrian's address, and despite the feeling that nothing would come out of it, I nevertheless sat down and wrote the professor a letter explaining my ideas and indeed research in Turkish language. Bu benim 40 yıl sonraki ilk Türkçe korrespondantımdır. This is first Turkish language correspondence I've written in 40 years. Began the letter I received from Dadrian. The letter has long since disappeared, but I can still see the first lines before my eyes, and it was the beginning of a friendship that would last for decades. He came to Hamburg for the workshop. His energetic intervention convinced the Institute to support my project. This is how I started working on Armenian genocide. My research project turned into my dissertation, and throughout this period, Dadrian was always generous with his time and his assistance. During those years, there was neither internet nor email. I corresponded with and updated him regularly by fax. As a Turk, I was actually very hesitant to undertake such a venture in genocide research. I was unsure about a lot of things and wanted answers for the hundreds of questions that plagued me, as to ensure that I didn't write or say anything incorrect. And Dadrian was there, patiently answering every one of my questions and sending me photocopies after photocopies of the sources on which these answers were based. But there were so many questions that at one point his patience nearly exhausted. He wrote a brief note on one of the facts saying, "Hopefully your question have come to an end." To this day, I have preserved all of the questions that I asked him and the answer that I received. It was thanks to him that I not only completed my PhD, but also came to America. He called Denis Papazian, the director of Armenian Research Center of the University of Michigan, Dearborn, to invite me to United States, and Papazian did. Truth be told, Vahakn could not be somewhat, he was a little bit prickly, okay? It was getting along with Dadrian was never an easy task for anyone, even for me. In one of his letters to me, responding to my proposal that we co-author an English and Turkish language edition of the post-war Istanbul trial, he wrote, quote, "I simply cannot work with another person," end quote, and dismissed my proposal. But upon my insistence, and to my immense good fortune, he ignored his custom in my case. The product is the book that you know. Dadrian wasn't just a mentor and helper in my academic life. He was also a guardian angel over my social life. Since I was the first Turkish academic to work on the Armenian genocide, I was received into Armenian circles only with great hesitation and suspicion. Yeah, this Turk, he might be a spy of Turkish government. For his part, Dadrian expended great effort attempting to dispel the prejudices against me among his fellow Armenians. I'm sure that there are among those who first heard of me due to Hakan Dadrian. I know he used to call people and tell about me. Ohannes is one of those individuals. As I said, I was like a son to him. He invited me to the gathering he would attend and introduced me to these circles. At one such a gathering, the question was directed at me as to why I had decided to work on Armenian genocide. I replied that, yeah, it was actually due to a coincidence. But Dadrian interjected, no, and launched into an ardent defense of me. And quote, these are his words. "You know this person? He has suffered greatly. He has sat in prison. He has been tortured. His family has suffered greatly. It is because of the sufferings of his own family and the torture that Taner knows and understands our suffering as Armenians, and it is thus no coincidence that he has decided to occupy himself with the Armenian genocide." He always longed for Istanbul, especially for Üsküdar. I greatly wanted him to come and visit Istanbul, but he was greatly afraid. "If I go there, they will kill me," he would say, and there was nothing I could do to convince him otherwise. When I asked him, "What food do you miss most?" he would always reply, "Izgara köfte," or grilled meatballs. Whenever he would come to Hamburg, I would take him to the restaurant of Maraşi Oruç abim. He couldn't get enough. He would order several plates of ızgara köfte and eat them all. Oruç abi would joke saying, "This man's appetite is insatiable." Dadrian's time in Vienna was a major turning point for him. One that eventually led him to becoming a genocide scholar. He had originally come to continue his studies in Vienna mathematics, but one of his instructors, upon learning that he was Armenian, asked him if he had ever read Franz Werfel's or his novel The 40 Days of Musadag. Dadrian replied that he was unaware of both book and the author. He immediately located a copy and read it cover to cover. Afterwards, he couldn't sleep out of embarrassment and shame. How could he be so completely unaware of his calamity that had befallen his people? Not a single member of his family or acquaintances has ever mentioned it to him, much less discussed it. He recalled during his childhood older people coming to his house, and they would close themselves off in a room where they would speak and then weep. At that time, he had no idea of the reason for these crying ceremonies, but now he did. And so he abandoned his mathematical studies. Later, he would devote his life to the studying Armenian genocide and become founding father of Armenian genocide studies. To speak of his contributions to the field would almost be insulting. He created it. So much so that our discussion today on will rest on the foundation that Dadrian bequeathed us. Today, We can talk about the shortcomings and excesses of his academic works. We are doing this. But we cannot deny that his heart always beat for his own people and for humanity in general. Dozens of times he told me that he frequently could not sleep at nights. Even in his dreams, he told me, the cries of the children who had been killed, of the people murdered in the deserts of Syria, never left him. Dadrian had the rare ability to combine in his work the objective, analytic eye of a scholar with the search for justice for the victims of their descendants. To me, this is where his greatness lies, both as a scholar and as a human being. Beyond his academic work, Dadrian was simultaneously active in working for the international recognition of Armenian genocide. It was Dadrian who, in 1996, was responsible for the achieving the declaration by 100 scholars, among them prominent Holocaust scholar Yehuda Bauer, opposing the Turkish government's denialist policies. The declaration appeared in the great many US newspapers. Similar initiatives would be repeated in the years 1998-2000. For Dadrian, scholarly work were simply one component of the larger struggle to have the traumatic event suffered by the Armenian nation recognized and to prevent future genocide. The renowned German Jewish sociologist Norbert Elias, upon receiving the Adorno Prize in 1977, said during his acceptance speech that he carries a torch that was lit by those before him and that there would be others after him to carry it into the future. But in Dadrian's case, it is he who lit the specific torch that he bore. One of his ultimate desires was to see, as young scholar, pick up that torch that he had borne so long and so far. And dear Richard, I need not to add that your name is always mentioned with Dadrian's when it comes to Armenian genocide studies. For my generation, the twin peaks of Dadrian and Hovhannisyan served as guideposts on the path. If Dadrian was its founder, this field has been firmly established through your work, Richard. It is almost impossible to find an article or a book on the genocide that doesn't refer to or cite your work. You are the most logical choice for Vahakan Dadrian Armenian Genocide Scholarship Award, but it cannot fully express the gratitude we feel for your life's labors. Congratulations again, Richard. You have pointed the way, and we shall follow it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Akcam.